And the video will be available to all CAG members and shared on our project website. A few reminders about Zoom for these meetings. First, please go ahead and check your name to show up that it's making sure it's showing the name and affiliation correctly. You can update this by clicking on your image and choosing rename. Please remember to keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. We're going to try and keep the chat open tonight as long as it doesn't get too distracting. And I want to make sure to note that if you have technical questions, you can chat directly at tech support John or call or text 402-972-7203. During our discussion and our question and answer period later today, we'll be using the chat and the raise hand tools for your participation. You should see both of those at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can also access the raise hand tool by popping out the participants box and choosing the hand icon, finding the raise hand tool at the bottom of your window, or by pressing in Windows Alt+Y, or in Mac Option+Y. It looks like we don't have anyone joining by phone tonight, and so we won't go through those instructions. And with that, you all received a copy of the agenda, both from Hadley Rodero, as well as from the project inbox with the meeting invite. Tonight's agenda is pretty packed, and it also is really focused on a time to get to know each other. We'll start with a few brief project team introductions. Then we're going to move into a presentation to ensure everyone has a shared understanding of the project. From there, we'll shift into advisory group member introductions. That's where we're excited to hear from each of you. And finally, a discussion of past and proposed community engagement, as well as more discussion about the purpose and role of this community advisory group. Following the presentations and discussions, we hope to have a few minutes to take final questions before we close and discuss next steps. Of course, we know it's nighttime, so if we wrap up early, we do, but want to make sure we all held these 2 hours together. And with that, I'm going to transition to doing some project team introductions tonight. So throughout the advisory group process, you all will be meeting a number of different members of our project team. You'll be meeting many of the core project team members and some subject matter experts to answer questions that may come up throughout our work together. In today's meeting, we have joining in a speaking role, Dave Sowers, the Director of Terminal Engineering for Washington State Ferries. Hi, Dave. Alec Williamson, Washington State Ferries Terminal Design Engineering Manager. Hadley Rodero, who's Washington State Ferries Communications and Community Engagement Manager for the project. And we also have a few other terrific members of our team joining here to listen, and I'll ask to wave hello. Charlie Torres, Washington State Ferries Project Manager. Hi, Charlie. And Doug Plater with Jacobs Engineering as the Consultant Team Manager. Hello. So before we get started, Dave, I'm going to turn it back to you for just a few words of welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. And on behalf of Washington State Ferries, including our Director of Ferries, Assistant Secretary Patty Rubstello, I want to thank you very much for to participate in this community advisory group. We know your time is valuable, and we really appreciate your commitment to this process and our collective goal to replace the Fauntleroy Ferry Terminal Trestle. Our aging terminal at Fauntleroy is a priority for Washington State Ferries, as is our commitment to be transparent and inclusive to the community process. As we launch the planning phase of this project, doing it together means we can continue to provide safe and reliable ferry service and be good neighbors and stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. So again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you all being here today. I know it's not maybe the best thing you'd want to do on a Wednesday evening, but we appreciate it, and we're excited to get this project going. And I'll go back to Liz to talk a little bit about our meeting goals.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, tonight, in addition to just getting an orientation for everyone about the project and the process, we want to have the chance for all of you to hear from each other. We also want to share a bit more information about the current conditions at the terminal and why the project is needed. And then, as I said earlier, we'll be spending some time talking about how the CAG wants to be engaged in the planning process, how the community will be engaged with the CAG, and what the role will be moving forward. And so with that, that's enough kind of preamble intro to get us started. We'll jump right in. I'm going to turn it over to Alec, and he's going to share some background about the project.
Great, thanks, Liz. I know most, if not all of you are very familiar with this terminal, but we're going to go through a few kind of level setting slides here about the terminal itself and the need for the project. With that, who does the terminal serve? The Fauntleroy Ferry Terminal in West Seattle supports the Triangle Ferry route with daily ferry service between West Seattle, Fauntleroy, Southworth, and Vashon Island. The Triangle route is part of State Route 160 and is served on the east side by Fauntleroy Way, which is a City of Seattle managed street. The Triangle includes 3 vessels, typically, not always, especially during COVID. We had some disruptions to service, of course, and less in service, but of course, we have the 3 destinations, and we have 3 different crossing times for the 3 different trips between the terminals as well. So it's a complicated and challenging route for sure. So in terms of seismic and structural challenges, today's terminal sits atop timber piles installed in 1957 and 1984. So it's no surprise the facility is showing its age. Many parts of the facility shown on this graphic are vulnerable to earthquakes and or due for replacement given their age. Our crews do conduct regular inspections and in recent years have needed to replace individual piles from time to time to keep the facility safe and operational. Another problem facing the current terminal is future rising sea level. Expected rising sea level and increasing frequency and intensity of storms means damage to the dock from debris during high tides is an increasing risk. Of course, there are many constraints and operational challenges at Fauntleroy Terminal. In addition to the structural and environmental challenges, there are long-standing operational challenges here at Fauntleroy Terminal. A couple of the major ones, vehicles queuing on Fauntleroy Way with only one shoulder holding lane to serve 2 different destinations. Another one is that we have a very small terminal. It's only got enough space for about 80 cars, although the terminal is served by 3 Issaquah class ferries that hold 124 cars each. And of course, there's no room for upland holding of cars. So replacing the Fauntleroy Ferry Terminal was one of the many recommendations included in the Washington State Ferries 2040 long-range plan. Others shown here relate to vessels, preservation improvements at the other terminals in the route, and installing shore charging capability to serve our future hybrid electric ferry fleet. And here I'll just go through the broad brush timeline real quick. So, as many of you know, the project we're talking about today follows nearly 3 years of work with the communities between 2016 and 2019 to develop and implement near-term operational improvements. In 2017, ferries made minor operational improvements at the terminal to streamline vehicle processing. And then in spring of 2019, WSF launched a new sailing schedule for Fauntleroy, Vashon, Southworth, with a lot of great input from the community. Earlier this spring, we started the planning phase for this terminal replacement project. Our work together will inform the level and timeline for environmental review, followed by design and ultimately construction. So the planning phase includes what we're just starting and embarking on right now, called the Planning and Environmental Linkages Study. This study is being conducted by Ferries in partnership with the Federal Highway Administration. They're the federal lead agency for this project. Health studies encourage early involvement with the public, tribes, jurisdictions, and regulatory agencies to be more effective in helping us identify transportation issues, environmental concerns, community values, and economic goals early in the project planning before design takes place. Health studies aim to expedite project schedules by identifying and reducing the number of alternatives to be advanced for more detailed environmental study and engineering design. So that's where we get the benefits of Pell is in the environmental review phase and in the design phase because we were more focused at that time. So the key steps for the planning phase include first, gathering input and identifying the project needs. Next, developing and screening potential alternatives or ways to address the project needs. And then this first starts with a fatal flaw screening of alternatives using the draft purpose and need statement that we'll be getting into later this summer. This is followed by additional screening and refinement of alternatives. Finally, developing a study report, a Pell study report that summarizes which alternatives or alternative, if it's a single option that's chosen, should move forward into the environmental review phase, and other recommendations about project implementation approach and the path forward. So as you can see throughout this process, there are meaningful opportunities for input and collaboration by the community, tribes, and advisory groups, such as the Community Advisory Group. Now I'll turn it over to Hadley Rodero to share more about community engagement during the Pell process.
And Alec, before we go there, we are actually going to pivot now and do our member introductions because it seems we have everyone who is planning to participate live on the line with us now. And so again, welcome to the few folks who joined a little bit late. We were giving a bit of a project background, and now we're going to turn it over to each of you. And in this section of the agenda, we really want to hear from you, not only your name, but a few details that many of us read about and learned about in your application, but a chance to share that with your other members here. So questions such as, why did you want to be part of the community advisory group? What is your connection to the project? So how do you want your affiliation to be described? We'll talk more about this later. And then what issue related to the replacement of the terminal most interests you? And so in random order, I'll put in the chat a list of all of our advisory group members here to facilitate as efficient and orderly introductions as I can. So you'll see that here in the chat. And you'll see all 24 members of our community advisory group listed here. There are a few who aren't joining us. And my hope is that, John, you are here as you're randomly selected to go first. John, you'll be followed by Anna and Judy. And so, John, if you're here, can you turn on your camera if you're comfortable with that and speak and share with us some input about who you are?
Me, John?
You, John. You know,
Okay.
we have any duplicate names, so you each get your name in full.
All right. Well, I live in West Seattle, and so we're in West Seattle. We're affected by the ferry traffic, and for the past I don't know, six years or so, I've been more involved in transportation as a board member on the West Seattle Transportation Coalition, and we deal with transportation issues that affect the peninsula here, and so the ferry is a sort of integral part of our challenges getting on and off our peninsula. And we're ferry riders. My kids go to school on Vashon Island a couple days a week, and so we take the ferry. And I think that sort of, theoretically makes us, I guess, sort of uniquely positioned in that we're, you know, on the user end as well, not just on the neighborhood in West Seattle. So that's my spiel.
Hey, thanks very much, John. Welcome. Anna, we're going to turn it over to you. Anna.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hey, I'm Anna. I live in Southworth. I actually moved to the Southworth area about a year and a half ago. And one of the main reasons that I moved there was because of the ferry connection. I work in both Seattle and Kent. So having that, reliable transportation, being able to take the ferry was definitely a huge appeal to me. The main reason that I wanted to move to Southworth but still have the connection to the city is we're just starting a family. We have a baby and we wanted to raise our family, outside of the hustle and bustle of the city, but still needed that connection for convenience reasons. And, my main interest or focus on the ferry project is convenience, the design, and just the overall planning. I work in building construction, so I do have a pretty good understanding of the process and all the hurdles that you have to go through in order to get a project moving forward.
Anna, thank you very much. Judy, over to you.
Judy, I think you're muted. There
you
go.
There you go.
I've been around the block. I'm Judy Pickens. I'm a volunteer steward of Fauntleroy Creek, have been for 32 years. And so my primary interest is the impact of the ferry terminal on the creek in terms of water quality in the cove and also salmon outmigration and spawner access. I live across the street upstream from the ferry terminal.
Thank you, Judy. Welcome. Marty, if you want to come on video and off mute, you're up next.
Okay, I'm Marty Clements. I have lived in my house, 4 houses from the ferry dock for 40 years. And I've been on the ferry task force that was my most recent involvement with your group. My main issue I'm interested in changing is the processing. I think that I'm also interested in the design and some of the changes there. I came to Fauntleroy Community Association 25 years ago and said we need to make a park. And so I was the founder of the Cove Park, and for 20 years, one of the lead people doing the maintenance. So that's another big issue is that.
Marty, welcome.
Thanks.
Gary, I'm not sure if you're with us. If you're here, do you want to turn on your camera, please? Yeah, I don't think Gary was able to join. Let's move to Nolani. Nolani, do you want to share a bit about yourself with us?
Hi all, I'm Nolani Hatton. I am a West Seattle resident and a ferry user, and that's kind of what got me interested in this. I'm interested as to the design of it and how we can potentially lessen traffic in that area if possible when it comes to the ferry. That's pretty much it about me.
Terrific, welcome. Larry, we'll go next to you. Let's see. Looks like Larry hasn't joined us yet. Let's move Frank to you next. Frank Immel.
Sure, thank you very much. My name is Frank Immel. I am a resident. I'm actually 2 doors north of the ferry dock, Marty's neighbor, and across the street from Judy. I am a member of the Fauntleroy Community Association Board, and I'm also the chairman of the Fauntleroy Community Association Ferry Group. So this project is obviously very near and dear to my heart. I come from a marine construction background, so I'm very interested in the project and the process overall. Issues for me are going to be, as Marty said, is just processing of cars. You know, when I bought this house, the ferry line was in front of my house. I certainly do not expect this project will resolve that issue. And so I, you know, again, I don't, it's a word, you know, but just very interested in the process and being involved in how this moves forward.
Frank, welcome. Thank you. Emily Scott, we're next to you.
Hi. So let's see. I'm right here right now because I'm a resident of Vashon, so I obviously take the ferry often. I work in a public facing position as the ED of the Vashon Food Bank, so I'm interested in, you know, kind of public policy and how issues like public transportation affect kind of lower income populations in relatively high income areas like Vashon and West Seattle. In addition to that, I was a member of two different legislature funded studies through the Evans School at UW when I was getting my master's in public administration that were focused specifically on ticketing and loading at the Fauntleroy Ferry Terminal. So it's good to see several of you who I, you know, worked with or interviewed for those projects here. I also happen to be currently chair, although kind of co-chair with Justin Hirsch of the Vashon Ferry Advisory Committee. So my kind of interactions with this group are kind of multiple. And I think broadly as kind of a, you know, my interest in public policy, I think I'm most interested to see how ferries is able to navigate a really kind of gnarly public policy issue where there are, you know, competing interests in three different communities, but everybody ultimately wants the same thing, which is a functioning ferry system. So it's a really heady problem, and I'm looking forward to being part of it, but also seeing, you know, how it results and all the ins and outs along the way. So
Thanks, Emily. Here we go, huh? Next over to Victoria. Let's hear from you.
Sorry about that. I was muted. I'm a third generation West Seattle. I born and raised here on the north end of Lincoln Park, and I live on the south end, just 2 blocks from the ferry dock. But I'm also a board member of the West Seattle Transportation Coalition, so that's going to be my primary focus in looking at the scope of this project and how it gets rolled out. But I also have a very committed interest in the Fauntleroy Creek and the work that Judy Pickens does. I think we have to be very mindful of that as we proceed down here and come up with the choices that we want to make.
Welcome, Victoria. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
The next person, DB, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. I'm DB Gates. I lived in West Seattle for over 30 years, not close to the ferry though. But I grew up regularly riding the ferry, starting up in the San Juan Islands, then moved down here. And strangely enough, during the pandemic, I've actually ridden the ferry to Southworth more than ever because we were taking short trips over there. And I guess I just got interested in what was going on with that ferry terminal. Also take the ferry up to Whidbey Island a lot and have seen that new terminal open up there in Edmonds. So just overall interested. My neighborhood is slightly affected by the traffic from the ferry. We can always tell when the ferry has just unloaded. I'm kind of between Fauntleroy and California Avenues. So depending on which way they go. So just general interest.
Davey, welcome. Thank you. We're going to go next to David.
Hi, I'm David McDaniel. I've been a Fauntleroy Cove resident since late 1970s, so quite a few years here in the neighborhood, watching the traffic evolve, watching the ferry grow, watching the ferry riders grow, seeing the impacts for traffic and just impacts on the neighborhood in general. So those are very, very important issues to me. I'm also have a second home on Vashon, which I use, and I've used it quite a bit since this pandemic has hit. In fact, I've been over there quite a bit. So I'm not only a Fauntleroy Cove resident, but I also have a house on Vashon, which I'm over at quite a bit. So I got experience on both sides of the issue, getting on and off the traffic, ferry with the traffic. So traffic is really an important issue to me. I'm very concerned about the design. I've been an architect as a career, and so design is always important to me. Environmental issues are important to me. Views preservation. I'm interested in how it impacts the quality of the cove. I think this is a very, very unique cove, and I'd like to make sure that it's preserved in terms of the water quality, and the fish habitat. So, I mean, there's so many issues involved in this. It's, I guess everybody could go on and on and on. But anyway, so everything in general, and I hope to be a good participant. So thanks, everybody. Looking forward to working with you.
Welcome, David, and seeing you outside makes me miss being all together in physical space for these meetings. It certainly would have been a time to enjoy some ice cream or something nice and cool on this hot day together. All right, so moving back to the list. Fletcher, let's hear next from you.
Hi, I'm Fletcher Sandbeck, and I live in Manchester near Southworth, and I've been here about 15 years and have family over here as well. So was riding the ferry kind of this way prior to that for a good 10 years, and now primarily to Seattle. And I think what interests me most is I mostly ride the ferry to get into Seattle, and I ride transit. And so it's like the transit connections, and also how it interacts with the Southworth Fast Ferry that has just been launched. I think those are the things that interest me. Thank you.
Welcome, Fletcher. Michelle, we're going next to you.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see everyone here. Well, I've been a resident of Seattle for approximately 30 years, and the first 12 or 13 years of that time, I lived on Vashon Island. My children were small. I was doing the grueling downtown routine of park and ride, bus, ferry, a different bus, and then walking up to my office. So I've done all the public transportation possible. And that became a little unsustainable. And so we moved to West Seattle. So for approximately around 20 years, I've lived in the Morgan Junction area of West Seattle. And during that time, we had a second home that was over on the Key Peninsula, and we remodeled that, and I took the Southworth Ferry virtually every weekend. So I've had a lot of experience with the ferry system, and I've really seen the impacts on the neighborhood as well as the broader, our little West Seattle region. And then more recently, we've purchased a home on Vashon. So I've got a home in West Seattle and on Vashon that we'll be moving to eventually and retiring there later. So in my business, I'm in architecture and design. I've worked in a large firm for many years, and I do large commercial projects. And so my interests are pretty broad. I'm interested in the process, interested in sustainability for the future, so that if you spend the money wisely now, it will be something that can be useful in the future and not have to be redesigned or rebuilt or put a Band-Aid on it. I don't think that's a great thing to do. So I guess overall, I'm interested in relieving the pressure on the system, if that makes sense. So more in a design, from a design and volume standpoint. And so I'm happy to be here and just learn more about what we can do.
Michelle, welcome. Thanks for sharing. I'm not sure if Josh is joining us here tonight. Josh, are you on the line? Okay, let's move on. Helen.
Hi.
Thank you.
Yeah, I am currently a resident of Vashon Island and have been off and on for the last 40 plus years, although I spent a good 13 years back in Seattle, and some of those I was living up in the Arbor Heights neighborhood. So I traveled up and down Fauntleroy. I worked for about 8 years in transportation as a transit operator, and then spent several years living full-time and working on Vashon, and then now I'm commuting again, and I work for Seattle Public Utilities. I also have interactions with salmon biologists or fish biologists, and have an interest in the whole process. I definitely think there are a lot of technological innovations that could probably smooth things out and make things more efficient at the ferry terminal. And so, yeah, I'm interested in seeing what kind of innovations can be put into place. So that's what I've got to say.
Welcome, Helen. Thank you.
Thank
We're going to move next. Susan, over to you.
Hi, I'm happy to be here tonight with all of you. I live on Vashon and have for about 4 years, but prior to that, I was in West Seattle for about 12, just above the Fauntleroy Park. So I kind of have gotten to see both sides of, at least that leg of the triangle. And definitely am interested in trying to resolve some of the overload of traffic and the trouble with processing the amount of vehicles on the terminal. But one of the things that really interests me in being involved is I'm an architect, and I just like thinking about the design of public spaces. And so I feel like there's a unique opportunity here to allow this terminal to do something more than even just all the transit things it needs to do. And I'm hoping that it could become a public amenity for the West Seattle community, and that there might be some opportunity to make some portion of the dock available to just general public, that could become something that people actually like having that in the neighborhood versus get angry that it's there. So anyway, that's my interest, and I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for sharing, and welcome, Susan. Gregory, we're going to move it to you, and let us all know if you prefer Greg.
Greg would be my preference.
Okay, Greg. Welcome, Greg. Go ahead.
Call me Gregory. I look for my mom. So I live in Manchester. I work in Seattle. I'm a daily ferry commuter. I have worked very closely with Department of Transportation on sustainability and recycling. Continue those efforts daily. I have worked with City of Seattle on sustainable design for concrete on the seawall. I'm doing the same thing for the new Seattle Aquarium Ocean Pavilion. If anybody knows about that project, we just did the first mock-ups a couple weeks ago. So that should be exciting. I've worked on Pier 62, Coleman Dock. I'm a member of ACI 318, which is building code. I'm a member of the Sustainability Committee on that for 318. I am a member of ACI 130, Sustainability of Concrete, and I'm a member of ACI 555 for reuse of and recycling concrete in concrete. So I work a lot with sustainable materials and trying to move forward with sustainability efforts and measures. And as a daily ferry rider, I've pretty much seen everything that can go wrong on that route.
Greg, thanks for that. Welcome. Anne, over to you next.
Hi, I'm Ann Higuera. I'm a West Seattle business owner. We have a remodeling company in West Seattle, and I live on Vashon. So, and we work on Vashon sometimes too. We built a house right across from the ferry terminal last year for people who have lived in the neighborhood for, I think, 3 generations. Well, at least 2, no, 3. And so got to hear from them about the impacts and also their neighbors about the impacts of the ferry terminal. Before we moved to Vashon, we lived on Fauntleroy for 15 years with the ferry traffic going back and forth all the time. So I've seen it from all sides, and I'm not a daily commuter right now. I luckily can work from home a couple days a week, but I've been fascinated in the 6 years that I have been a mostly daily commuter by the complexities of the route, the difficulty of loading and processing, and I'm hoping I can bring some some good ideas to that, as well as take really good care with the community, because there's a really big impact on the West Seattle side.
And welcome, thank you so much. Moving now to Daniel. Hearing that he's, let me look here. Yep, look, doesn't look like Daniel is here. Let's move to Richard. Richard, over to you. Next to Scott.
Well, first, I apologize. My camera's out right now. I'll get it fixed by the next meeting.
No worries.
I've been on Vashon Island for almost 28 years now, and I signed up for this opportunity because I believe I had a unique perspective. During this time, I commuted from Vashon into the Southworth and worked in Port Orchard and Bremerton for 12 years. And then in addition to that, the rest of the time I was commuting into downtown Seattle, either via Fauntleroy or by the water taxi. And my background is in banking. I've worked with a number of, actually literally dozens of small businesses in both out in the peninsula and on Vashon. So that's part of my perspective, is how all this affects businesses that are out there. I'm older, and so therefore I'm very much into the senior community as well, as far as how this affects retirees and people that are not regular commuters, but find this to be a very important lifeline, especially for the people on Vashon. Again, part of my work background in banking and such was working in construction, helping small businesses build things, not on the grand scale of a ferry terminal, but I have some ideas about costs and such here. So I believe I have a very diverse background that which I commuted with a lot of people from Southworth. I know a lot of people from Fauntleroy before here. I was on the Ferry Advisory Committee for Vashon Island for 10 years. That was about 10 years ago. So a lot of different ideas, and I'm hoping I can put that to work and we can come to a win-win actually a win-win-win with all the stakeholders.
Okay, I heard that triple win. Thank you, Scott. Yes. Welcome. Devin, would you share a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Devin Branson, and I live on Vashon, and I have for the last about 10 years or so. And I am a middle school teacher in West Seattle. So every school day that's not in a pandemic, I would go forth there. For a while, I was a member of the Vashon Alternative Transportation Committee from King County, which was a really interesting experience to be a part of. And in my pre-teaching day, I work in transit up in Whatcom County for a while. So I have some experience in that. I think the biggest thing that interests me in this is really all of it. I think it's really just a fascinating process, but especially the transit and efficiency part of it, and also the environment as well. So I'm really looking forward to be a part of this process.
Welcome, Devin. Angus, I think we're going to round out the introductions with you.
Great. I'm Angus McNabb. I've been a West Seattle resident for about 15 years, currently live in Arbor Heights. I'm the father of two Vashon commuter students. Background in data science, data analytics, software engineering. In terms of advocacy, I want to advocate for the Vashon commuter students. They're a vital part of Vashon School District, so Vashon School District as well. Really just kind of the West Seattle Peninsula residents, the aesthetic of the Fauntleroy kind of waterline, and then also, of course, the native Chinook salmon and, the orcas in the area, particularly the southern, resident orcas.
Angus, welcome. I want to give the chance if anyone has joined since we've done introductions to come on camera and sound and introduce yourself. Okay, well, great job. That was the first act in charge of the CAGs to do these introductions. And we'll be talking a little bit more later in the agenda about how to synthesize some of your introductions when we think about publishing a roster of the community advisory group on our project website. But now we're going to move back into presentation mode for a bit and hear about community engagement. So Hadley, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Liz, and thank you everyone for those great introductions. I'm so happy to see a lot of familiar faces and meet a lot of new folks here tonight. I think it's a really great group, and I was really pleased especially to hear so many of you talking about the connections between the communities and how you had affiliations or interests in different parts of the route and different sides of the water. So that really seems like exactly what we're going for with this group. Many of you here tonight have been with us along the way as we've kind of worked through challenges with this terminal and with the route since 2016. We kicked off some kind of focused community engagement for the Fauntleroy Vashon Southworth route. And some of you have been very involved in that. And I'm sure others of you have just been reading about it in the West Seattle blog and the Beachcomber and Kitsap Sun and kind of hearing about it from afar. But we've been engaging the community on how to improve reliability of the route and congestion around the Fauntleroy terminal. And we worked together to identify some priorities and put some actions in place that were sort of short-term actions we could do before this larger project kicked off. In 2017, we made minor operational improvements at the terminal to try to streamline the vehicle processing. And in spring 2019, we launched a new sailing schedule for the Fauntleroy Vashon Southworth route, which was the first new schedule in a number of years. And really one of the big changes, which was thanks to Marty Clements, actually, who's on this group now. She suggested this idea is trying to eliminate some of the dual destination sailings or some of the single destination sailings in the afternoon and make more of the sailings go to both Vashon and Southworth so that every car could get to the toll booth and process through and get on a boat rather than needing to pull cars out of line to go to Vashon or Southworth. So that's been a little bit of a minor improvement, kind of a stopgap. And then we had COVID come and change things and changed ridership. And so that's brought us to where we are today. But those ideas are good examples of how we've listened to the community over the years and worked together with both our Triangle Task Force that met for a number of years, our ferry advisory committees, and other larger public engagement efforts that we've had. And we're trying to do that similar level of engagement, but take it up a notch as we launch this project. Ahead of tonight's meeting, we've been engaging with some of our past stakeholders and some key groups, and they've helped us develop our community engagement plan and helped suggest that we have this advisory group model that we're starting tonight as a good way to collaborate with the communities. We've been making the rounds and presenting to community organizations. We've been to the Fauntleroy Community Association, the Vashon Maury Island Community Council. We're going actually later this week to the West Seattle Transportation Coalition and next month to the Morgan Community Association. And we hope to do more of those presentations. So I'd love to hear from all of you if there are other groups that you represent or that you know of in your communities that would benefit from a briefing on this project and a Q&A session. We're happy to do that. And then in March, we had some virtual community meetings, which was our official kickoff for this project. And I don't know how many of you attended those, but they were fairly well attended and a good chance for us to sort of introduce the project to the community and get some initial engagement about the types of things people were interested in learning about the project and issues they hoped that this project would address. So thank you for being part of the 64 people that applied to be on this group, and you were all the ones that were selected to be here. I know we're missing a few members today. I believe we have, Liz, you can correct me, 24 members of the community advisory group in total.
That's correct. Yeah.
And so this is our first meeting. So we'll move on to our goals for community engagement for this project. And the first one is to be transparent with the public about the complexities of the project and how community input will be used at every step of the way to inform our decision-making. We'll be working with communities to define core problems faced by ferry riders and nearby neighbors of the terminal, providing opportunities for the public to meaningfully shape the project development and inform decisions, proactively seeking to include current and historically underrepresented and or underserved populations in the project area, engaging the public through virtual and other innovative tools, especially until it's safe for us to gather in person again, like our meeting tonight. But also one of our key goals for this project and approaches is we'll keep some virtual meetings going even after we can meet in person, because we know that it's hard for everyone to travel to a meeting in one of the 3 communities, and that really limits participation. So I think that while COVID kind of accelerated our comfort with this type of virtual meeting, it's something that we're interested in doing for this project and this group in particular, so that everyone can participate kind of on a level playing field, and we can make it as easy as possible for everyone to be in the same room, the same virtual space, and hear each other's perspectives, and same with our public meetings as well. So the community dialogue, the cross-community dialogue that we're hoping to form with this project and to generate will help us define the right project to address the needs. And it's sort of an iterative process that we're just starting tonight. Our commitment to the advisory groups is to have the information sharing and feedback loop and to be transparent and iterative at all of our key milestones. So either we'll have a topic that's introduced at these meetings, we'll have discussion with you and with our other 2 advisory groups. We also have a technical advisory group, which is staff from various agencies that have a role in permitting this project or a role in as partners in transit and managing the roadways near the terminal. So we'll share feedback from all 3 groups and then have discussion, get your input. We'll consider the input and bring it back to our project team, maybe ask for more input from you, and then we'll make our final decision. So this graphic sort of illustrates how at every step of the way, it's going to be iterative, and there'll be multiple chances for you to weigh in and to hear what others are saying before Washington State Ferries ultimately makes a decision and moves on to the next step of the process. We're going to be sharing information. We'll be allowing time for you to have discussion and seeking input at every step of the way. And one thing we'd like to hear later in this meeting from you is kind of how you hope to get that information. And we're going to try to make it as easy as possible to digest it, whether that's by email or electronically in between meetings or at these meetings themselves. Some of the tools that we're working on as part of our greater community engagement process, which these advisory groups are part of that, but we're also doing a lot of outreach to the general public and other audiences as we go along. We'll be using a wide range of tools to create accessible and equitable opportunities for the community to learn about the project, ask questions, and share feedback. I mentioned that we'll be doing briefings and presentations along the way. We have these 3 advisory groups. The executive advisory group is elected officials and executives from legislators and the city of Seattle and others. The technical advisory group, as I mentioned, is agency staff, and then you, the community advisory group. We'll be hosting online community meetings, and perhaps at some point along the way here in the next several years, we'll have in-person meetings as well. We'll be regularly sharing information on our website, through our email listservs, on social media and other channels, and then doing our best to partner with community and social service organizations to help reach those typically and historically underserved communities and make sure that we really hear a wide range of voices as the project continues. So this next slide shows kind of graphically what I've been describing, that there's a lot of people that have a role in informing the final Pell study report. The advisory groups you can see there on the bottom, the community advisory group, technical advisory group, executive advisory group, our ferry advisory committees. We have a ferry advisory committee in each of the 3 communities, and they're also represented on the CAG, but also they'll be having discussions with us as they always do at their regular meetings. The tribes, we have a number of tribes that have treaty fishing rights in the area and other cultural resource interests in the project area. Underrepresented communities, the general public and communities and taxpayers, and then ferry customers, those who depend on the ferry or who ride it regularly. So they're all going to have a voice, which will result in our final planning and environmental linkages study report that will come out in about 2 years. And that report will inform the alternative or alternatives plural that we carry into the environmental review process, the NEPA environmental review process, which is the official environmental documentation that will allow us to move forward into design and then construction. So that's just a little bit about where we're at and how you fit into the greater picture of the project engagement and the project planning process. Alex showed you the timeline of sort of the steps that will go into getting to that final report. So now, you know, we're gonna treat our community engagement plan as a living document. We have a draft of it that we'll share with you after this meeting. We want your feedback, and we'd like any ideas you have about tools that we should use, audiences we should reach out to. If we're missing anyone, you all heard who each of you represents. If you think we're missing a critical voice or a critical group, you know, please let us know that. And if you think if there's others in the communities that would like a briefing or would like to be involved, let us know that too as we go along. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Liz, and she'll talk more about your role.
All right, everyone, just doing a quick check-in. I know that we've moved quickly through all that content, so much so we're quite a bit ahead of schedule. So I'd like to propose just a 5-minute break for folks. I know it's dinner time, meal time, so take a minute, make sure and get yourself nourished and hydrated, and we'll come back together and start it at 7 o'clock. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for flexibility as we kind of read the room here and saw where we were on the agenda. Hope you enjoyed a couple minutes to get regroup. It's been a long day. It's the nighttime, so here we are. The next part of our agenda, we're actually going to pivot towards talking about the purpose, role, and charter of the advisory group. And while this was summarized as part of the application that you all completed, we want to make sure that there's a shared understanding together as members before we finalize that charter. So I'm going to go through a few slides and then we'll be opening it up for a few polls and discussion as a group. So first, this slide outlines what the CAG purpose is during the Pell study. And we see the CAG serving an advisory role in collaboration with Washington State Ferries through providing input and feedback reflective of the community's needs, issues, and concerns for the project. More specifically, we hope to hear your input, ideas, as we go through the process around the purpose and need for the project, various criteria to help us screen alternatives, potential solutions and alternatives to address the current and future needs of the terminal, input, as Hadley mentioned earlier, about our broader community engagement planning effort during the planning phase, and also mentioned earlier about the executive advisory group, who this group will be meeting for the first time in July. We hope that members of the community advisory group and technical advisory group can be sharing input with this executive group on a regular basis as well. So that's another role of the CAG. More specifically, the role of the CAG will include reviewing agendas and any meeting materials sent in advance, attending all meetings and participating in discussions between meetings. So we know things come up, emergencies happen, we're all human here, but we really do ask that you do your best to participate in each of our meetings. We ask that CAG members openly share input, ideas, and information to encourage collaborative and efficient dialogue between folks. We hope people can flag issues or impacts that should be considered in decision-making. We hope you can keep an open mind regarding others' input, ideas, and perspectives. And then we also will be seeking your input during the Pell study report process itself. And a reminder that the Pell study will capture which alternative or alternatives carry forward into the environmental phase of the project. Lastly, it's the role of the CAG to voice concerns about this process itself with Washington State Ferries, with each other, and with me before taking public action or statement that could affect the CAG process. I'm going to move next to outlining what Washington State Ferries' role and commitments are in this process. Washington State Ferries will provide meeting agendas in advance of each meeting, presentation materials and summaries, including a recording of these meetings following each meeting, provide information to support and inform a good and robust dialogue across CAG members, consult with the CAG, listen carefully, and consider CAG input prior to finalizing recommendations about project alternatives, provide regular updates to the members regarding the schedule of future meeting, and explain how CAG feedback and or recommendations were considered and reflected in the study and or decision-making. At the close of the planning phase, Washington State Ferries will also work with the community advisory group to determine next steps for future CAG participation and membership. Lastly, a quick overview of my role. My role is to serve as an impartial person who guides the process, including facilitating these meetings, to keep us focused on the agreed upon task and agenda, to set the protocol, suggest alternative methods and procedures, encourage participation, read the room, take a break like we did to best facilitate good conversation, to work with the Washington State Ferries team to coordinate logistics, prepare the materials, and document the meetings, to provide technical support. I have my colleague John providing technical support for the meetings, to make sure that we have accessible and addressed any accommodation needs and requests that have been made, to assist in keeping communication open between the CAG members and the team, and lastly, to not offer substantive opinions or recommendations about the alternatives. So this is my role as part of the CAG process. So you can see now why we offered a bit of a break. That was a lot of content there. And at this point, we're going to move into more of a discussion mode. And I'm going to start with just a couple of polls to get us warmed up. And the first one is going to be about your past experience participating in a community advisory group. So please participate once it's launched. Give you just a minute here. So have you participated in a community advisory group before? It's like just a couple more people to vote here. Well, this is exciting. We've got a good mix of people who have participated before and some people who this is their first experience. So I'd love to ask if someone who has participated in a community advisory group before can come on camera and turn on your mic and share one lesson or great takeaway that you've had from a past community advisory group experience. Looks like there's 6 of you who've participated before. Don't be shy.
I guess I'll go ahead. Again, my name is Frank. I would say that, just being open-minded and willing to hear other people's opinions and not come with your set agenda is the best way I've found to achieve goals and achieve progress.
Thanks, Frank. Anyone else want to offer insights or experience here?
This is DB Gates. I've worked on some contentious community groups with legislative changes having to do with law enforcement. And I learned that sometimes it's better to wait till the next meeting after you've been able to process what other people have said about things. And it seemed to be able to bring us together if we took a pause. How's that?
Thanks for that wisdom, DB. Any other insight from folks who've participated before?
This is Scott Harvey. I was in the FAC for about 10 years previously, and it gave me it's really important, again, to listen to what the other groups outside of Vashon have to say. In other words, it's really important to them, just like it's important to us on Vashon. And keep that open mind and solicit their point of view here, and to see, in other words, if we can get a consensus on what would be best for all.
Thank you for sharing that. I think I heard one other person come online.
Ann Higuera. I'm on the West Seattle Bridge Task Force, which is, I've only been on it virtually because it happened right at the beginning of the pandemic. And one of the big takeaways from that is identifying yourself really clearly whenever you speak, so that people who may not be able to see the presentation later and are listening to it can actually know who's speaking. So that identification is really important for accessibility for the public when they're listening to the meetings later.
And thanks for that tip. And that's a great recommendation for members. And let's ask that we try and do that as we continue this conversation and advisory group meeting today. Any other thoughts before we move on? And then I'd like to turn it to those people who are excited to be here, but it's their first advisory group, and just give some space if there's anything that you're excited about in your first group, worried about, and just give you the opportunity to share what comes up when thinking about this as your first role. Give you one more chance here to think if there's something you want to share with the good of the group, and otherwise, no problem, we'll move on.
I think for me, it's a potential growth experience, just getting more experience working with folks of differing opinions. I mean, I really don't have much opportunity to do that, and look forward to, kind of, being involved in a collaborative process.
Thank you for stepping up and sharing. Anyone else want to share?
Yeah, I think to add to that, I have been on the other end of kind of like stakeholder outreach before, but I've not spent that much time in this larger group or diverse group myself. So I'm also interested to see what the dynamic is like on the other end. So I've, in my experience, it can be really creative, and there can be some really like frustrating roadblocks. So again, it's like I think the process is very exciting.
Thank you, Emily. Anyone else from the 11 or so people who are joining this for the first time?
I guess I'd just throw out there, I don't do a ton of big group Zoom meetings like this. And I don't know, I guess I just sometimes feel a little uncertain about whether we should have our cameras on or off. And yet when it's a 2-hour meeting, it is hard to have your camera on the whole time. You just feel, so I don't know, like maybe just as the facilitator, if you can help guide us with when you'd like us to have them on, or times when maybe it's okay for us to have them off if we feel like slouching or whatever. So anyway, that's just a little tidbit.
Yeah, Susan, thank you for that. And of course, the you all are joining on your own time, right? So your comfort and participation need to match what works for you. I think a best practice would be that as the presentation parts of the agendas are happening, feel free to not have your camera on. And you'll see the project team members up there just because we're rooting each other on and making sure that we're showing some support for those presentations. But I also would offer that at any time, if the camera is not working for you, please don't feel any pressure to turn it on. We'll really try and focus our on-camera time to the membership introductions or discussions that we'll be having shortly. But again, default to what's comfortable for you. Would any other member like to chime in there? Thoughts, experience, or feedback? Thanks for that, Susan. Okay, so we're going to run one other poll, and this is just to help us with discussions and trying to figure out agendas in the future where we're balancing the level of information we're sharing. And so I'm just going to gauge a quick set of feedback about how saturated you all are feeling at this point in the meeting and night. So hold on. Here we go. So if you take just a minute, this is, how's your information saturation at this point? Just about right. I'm still tracking. Too much. Wow, I feel overloaded. Keep going. I've got room for more. Great. So we're at about the hour and 15-minute point. We took a brief break, but it seems like we're kind of in a sweet spot of information sharing and discussion. So thank you for taking that poll and helping us think about future meeting length and design. At this point, we're actually going to open it up and offer the opportunity for members to share thoughts and reflections about the CAG charter and role, or any of the community engagement discussion we've had so far, for about the next 5 or so minutes. And then we have a few specific discussion questions I'd like to facilitate us through. So with that open-ended opportunity here for folks to weigh in, again, you can use the chat to share comments, ideas, or thoughts, or you can use the raise hand function. If you're having trouble with that, feel free to come off camera and mic, and I can call on you. It looks like John, you have your hand up still?
Yeah, I had one question. I don't know if it's too early to be asking this. In terms of the project scope, are we going to be looking at things, uplands like the toll booths and the way the terminal interfaces with Fauntleroy Way? or I mean, I think somebody mentioned it, like processes for how passengers are handled, you know, kind of, you know, what it means, or are we going to be, I guess, can you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I'm actually going to ask Alec to come online, and the question is around, you know, what is the scope of the project that the CAG will be participating in flooring? Alec, can you come off video and camera?
Yes, that's a great question. And yes, you know, all of that will definitely be looked at as part of this process. You know, we're early. We're going to be exploring many options, many different configurations, and really exploring all the different trade-offs with all of those various options and considerations. So yeah, I mean, that was a perfect question for where we're at in the process right now. We're just, you know, getting this project off the ground. It's a planning process. And, you know, I think right now, at least for me, I'm thinking a lot about, you know, really defining what the problem is and what are we trying to achieve. And, you know, thinking broadly and with an open mind. So, I mean, that's where I think our team is at right now. And so that's, you know, why we're really interested in your participation in this and your input, because you guys are the experts of the area and of the terminal and of the routes.
Thanks, Alec. And John, hopefully that answers the question around the kind of scope or purview of what the community advisory group will be working on. We will have a chance later at the end of our time together to have more sort of detailed project level questions, or at least to capture the kinds of things you're interested in for future meeting agendas. But before we get there, I guess I want to come back to gauging feedback or questions about either the community engagement discussion or the community advisory group. Marty, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I would like a little bit more definition about how we can communicate with other people in the group, or the tech group, or the exec group. In the ferry task meeting, there were individuals who were no longer allowed on it because they miscommunicated and they had some problems. So if you could just define a little bit more, I'm still unclear whether we'll have everybody's emails, or if there's things that we always run through you guys first, or how that all works.
Coming off mute here. Thanks, Marty. So a couple of things. One is around the email list for this roster of members. And we want to talk about that with the group here tonight to both gauge your interest and comfort with sharing that across all members, as well as our interest in publishing the roster of members on our website so the broader community knows who's on the community advisory group and what community interests or affiliation are they representing. So that's one piece that we'll do a quick poll on later in the night to make sure there's consensus around. Your second question was around what's the role of the CAG in communicating with the other advisory groups?
A little bit different from that is I understand that you will process information that we have and share it with them. But I'm assuming that the tech group and the exec group will all be listed on the website. But are we restricted and not able to talk with them ourselves?
Yeah, thank you. So we are proposing that the CAG and TAG identify some key representatives to brief and participate in dialogue with the executive advisory group at key milestones. And so there will be an opportunity for the executive group to hear directly from the CAG on ideas, input, recommendations that come from our discussions. So that will be a part of the standing agenda for the executive advisory group. Also, the meeting summaries will be shared from the community advisory group here with this group, and the technical advisory group will also be briefing the execs. Does that kind of help to start we want to do our best to have the conversations happen in these meetings, right? To avoid as many side conversations and side information sharing that isn't available to the broader group. The goal of this group is that we all have the same information and knowledge about concerns or considerations that come up with any idea that's being presented. So we do ask that the conversations really happen and focus here.
That's important to understand. And I feel that there's, some of us already have relationships with the public representatives and that's longstanding. And there's, so there's some sort of strangeness where you want to be certain that you're not doing anything wrong or that's, but that might be, need to be understood. And then the other, corollary to that is that there are individuals who were not selected. We have 65 or so that were on, and so there's 40 people that we know of that were passionate enough to try to be on these committees. And would we ever know who they are, or is that just buried information?
Yeah, so the participants who were not, or the applicants who are not selected for the advisory group have been invited to join our other public listserv, and so will be included in the broader engagement efforts. So whether that be the community meetings, we'll talk in a bit around how the broader community, how the CAG feels about which method would best involve the broader community in the actual CAG meetings or in the CAG dialogue. So that's another way that those people could be engaged. There were a mix
invited to be on the public listserv, and that public listserv would be something that if we wanted to look at, we could see who's on that, or that's not.
Marty, I'll just jump in for a sec to say that we're not going to share the names of people who applied who were not selected, just because we want to respect their privacy. And but what Liz was getting at is we're going to be talking in a few minutes. One of the next discussion questions is how we would potentially open these meetings, your meetings, up to interested members of the community who want to listen in or offer public comment to you all, either in the meeting or some sort of process where they would submit it in writing and then we'd read it out to you all or email it to you all. Like those of you who indicated you've been part of advisory groups in the past, that's pretty common practice, where you take public comment or you have public members of the public who are able to listen into the meetings or view the meetings if they're in person. So that's something we want to talk about. And I think that there's probably likely some of those people who expressed interest in being in the CAG would want to follow along closely with the meetings. And then some of them were not selected because they didn't have, express a strong interest. And I think some of them have told us since then that they're not, they're kind of glad they weren't selected and they didn't have a strong interest in being the level of commitment that this group requires.
Well, perfect. Because one of the things that happens after this is they say, well, I know some people who applied and are not on, and they're saying, well, what happened and how do I know?
Right.
What do I do?
Right.
So
that's what we're going to talk about next.
Tell them where to go or what.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So we'll be posting things on the website, notes and the meeting recordings, as Liz mentioned, and then we're going to talk to you all about your comfort level in making these meetings more public. And it's different because they're virtual meetings than when you're all in a room around a table and you have an audience, kind of that more traditional format. And then back to your last comment about briefing your elected officials or others that you all have relationships with in the community. And I think that's something that we should discuss as a group, but our interest is that the trust and transparency of this group remains intact, that you all feel comfortable speaking up and not thinking that someone's going to sort of talk behind your back about what you said. So that piece that was on our role slide a little earlier, voicing any concerns about the CAG process or dialogue within the group or to us or to Liz as our neutral consultant facilitator would be our preference, rather than going to an elected official or something and saying, this group doesn't seem fair. I'm not, something like that about the process, but certainly all of you wear many hats and you have relationships, which is one reason you were selected to be on this group. So I'd say it's a little bit of both, that those relationships are really important and that community dialogue is important, but that maintaining the trust and transparency of this process among yourselves would be helpful as we move along. Does
Thank you
that make
very much.
sense?
Thank you very much. That helps a lot.
Looking at the hands here, Frank, it looks like you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hopefully a quick question. Can you explain the three groups in the hierarchy? It seems like you're saying that the TAG and the CAG are going to report to the executives. So the executives, do they have like 3 times the weight of us, or they were 2 of us, or how is this going to work on kind of the value of the information? You're asking for the community input. We are the writers. We are the people that are affected. Is our conversation going to carry the day, or at least an equal share?
Hadley, do you want to start?
Sure. Frank, I don't think there's any hierarchy because all 3 groups are advisory groups, and that name is important, that you're all advising Washington State Ferries, but we will not be asking for anybody to vote or anybody to come to consensus or anything like that. I mean, we're going to be hoping for what we call informed consent. So you all sort of generally understand the trade-offs, have heard both sides, agree that the process was transparent and fair, but everybody may not agree on the final alternative, or it may not be their top choice. So none of the groups report to each other. I think what Liz mentioned is what we've heard from our executive advisory group members is that they will be meeting less frequently than you. They're all very busy. And so they kind of want to have a synopsis at each meeting about the issues that have been discovered or identified from the community. And just like we'll be briefing them on what we hear at our public meetings and sharing kind of comment summaries with them, they'll be really interested in hearing what your takeaways are at each milestone and what your discussion has been all about. So that could be in the form of sharing the meeting notes with them from your meetings, or some sort of summary of key issues or points, or having certain members of this group come to one of their meetings and pop on camera and share a little report or update yourselves. And then same with our technical advisory group, just as a way for those executives to hear what everyone else is hearing. And many of you are their constituents. So that's kind of why they're interested in this process, is they want to hear what their constituents think. And that will help them give us the best advice from a policy perspective. So it's not that you're reporting to them or anything. It's just will be a great way for them to hear what their communities think and to hear the balanced perspective that comes from all of you together in the same room.
Okay, Frank has a thumbs up there. I'm going to move on. Scott, you've got your hand up. What do you have to offer or ask? And just a reminder to come off mute there.
Is that better?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I share Frank's concerns a little bit too, in the fact that I would, in a perfect world, and I don't know if we're going to have a perfect world in this situation here, I would like to think that the group can come to a consensus of what would serve the 3 communities best. I mean, there could be people there will always be people disagreeing here, but I'm looking for a consensus here. My concern here is that ferries would say, well, that was nice you thought about here, but we think it should go somewhere else. And that is something that I would think would not serve well, because I mean, we're the people that use the ferries. We're the ones that are impacted, whether it's on Fauntleroy Way or trying to get off Vashon, or the people that are commuting from Southworth. And I think that I would hope that ferries would be committed to doing what we as a group feel would best serve our 3 communities. And so anyway, that's my thoughts on it.
Scott, thank you for sharing that perspective and feedback. That's exactly what this part of the agenda is about, is to hear from all of you on what your reactions and ideas or concerns are with the process. Before I put a couple of specific questions to prompt discussion in the chat, any other general feedback or remarks from members?
This is Victoria. Could you explain a little more about the responsibilities of the technical and the executive groups? I'm not sure I clearly understand what their roles are going to be.
You want me to jump in, Liz?
Go ahead.
Okay. I don't have it in front of me, the exact language that's in the community engagement plan, which we will share with you after this. So you can see there's a very concise sort of definition of each group in that plan. But in a nutshell, the technical advisory group is exactly what their name implies. They're the technical folks. So they're people who work for or staff of agencies such as Seattle Department of Transportation, Department of Ecology, the Department of Natural Resources, Kitsap Transit, King County Metro. So all the agencies, King County Wastewater Treatment Division, since they have a facility that abuts ours. So all the agencies that have a role in partnering with us on this project, intersecting with their facilities or operations, or the permitting agencies that we'll be going to as the project progresses for permits to build the project. So they're advising us in a technical way. So making sure that we're using the right data, the right technical information, and that we're all in sync on plans for projects that they have underway or operations. So that's kind of their role as staff at our fellow agencies. The executive advisory group is elected officials from each of the three communities. So we've got legislators from the different districts that this project encompasses. We have a delegate from the Seattle Mayor's office. We have, let's see who else. We have a tribal chairperson from one of the tribes that has treaty fishing rights in the area. And we'll share the full roster with you. So they're ones who have a governing role. King County Council, for example, which has Vashon and West Seattle. So they have a governance role. They have a role in helping ensure that we get funding for this project. They are certainly, interested in what their constituents think and what they may be hearing from their constituents in their communities, and as a policy advisor for us. So how does this fit into other transportation policy and funding in the area? So they're all a little bit different, but all of you, I think, have similarities in the types of input you'll be giving Washington State Ferries.
Thanks for that question, Victoria, and Hadley for your answer. We're going to shift now to a couple of specific questions I'm putting here in the chat. And one relates to our discussion earlier about sharing the roster of the CAG members. And while you shared great, wonderful and lengthier intros earlier, we'd like to know how you'd like your name and affiliation listed in that roster. And we'd also want to know if there's any further concerns or comments about sharing that roster on our public website. So the way that we'd love to collect for ease and efficiency is if you'd go ahead and put your name and affiliation in the chat. We'll collect and capture those later and turn it into the draft roster that we then publish on the public website. So again, if you could take just a minute. Thank you, John, for going first. And let us know what your name and affiliation is that you'd like described as it relates to the CAG. That would be very helpful. So we'll pause for just a few minutes so folks can do that. And Larry, I know you've joined the meeting recently, and you weren't able to hear the introductions from others, but since you're joining now, would you be able to just give a quick hello to the group? And if you're comfortable, come off camera and let folks know who you're representing here tonight. And a reminder that you'll need to turn your camera on and mic on. Okay.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Larry Harla. I'm a Southworth Ferry Advisory Council member, and I'm also just an area resident, Manchester, Port Orchard area, and I'm a planner actually for the city of Tacoma. I'm a senior planner in the Long Range Planning Division, so I sort of have roles that are similar to activities like these. Definitely involved in a lot of transportation planning and stuff for the city of Tacoma. So that's where I'm coming from, and I'm definitely somebody who uses ferry transit fairly frequently and have family members who do as well. And so I have a strong interest, you know, in how important this is for all of us, for our community, and the connection to, you know, the employment and the population center of our region. It's super important for all of us.
Very welcome. Thank you. And so when you watch the recording of this video, you can go back and hear more about your fellow members. And speaking of that, thanks to everyone who's given their input about name and affiliation. If you could, for those who haven't completed that, try and finish it up by the end of the meeting. That would be much appreciated. The next piece is around our plan to share recordings and summaries on the website following each meeting, and want to offer an opportunity for members to share any ideas, feedback, or concerns you have about this that we can address. Okay. Final minute here for anyone to ask questions or offer feedback on that. Okay. And then from there, as Hadley mentioned during the presentation about community engagement, the team will be engaging the public throughout the 2-year planning process using the variety of tools that she overviewed. But we also want to get your feedback about other ways to further support community member input. Marty, this kind of gets to the question you raised earlier as well. There are a few different models that are typically used, but we really want to open up a discussion with all of you about the best ways to do that. Inclusive and transparent engagement is super important, and we also respect and value your time, so want to hear what might best work for you. I'm putting a few ideas in the chat of ways that other community advisory groups have engaged community members, and would love to then open it up for a discussion with advisory group members. It's coming to you in just a second. So a couple of the options or ideas put here in the chat are around allowing the general public to participate in Zoom webinar like we're using here tonight. There's a feature where others can watch or view the discussion, whether or not there's an opportunity for active participation or speaking. There's also a room for discussion about how to invite community members to share feedback. Some ideas include asking for feedback ahead of the meeting, such that that feedback can be shared with all community advisory group members, and including a set time on the agenda to discuss anything that comes up. Including a standing part of the agenda to hear from the community members directly about concerns is another idea around that. And we really want to have a chance for discussion across members on this point. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and see if folks have feedback or ideas or thoughts about those concepts. Again, you can use the chat function or raise your hand.
Liz, are you going to be putting out information releases to like the West Seattle blog, either in anticipation of the meetings or in summary of meetings that have happened?
Victoria, that's exactly what we're talking about here today. So yes, there will definitely be publication of the meeting dates and times on our website. And the question here for the group is what level and what method of engagement seems best to facilitate conversations and allow the opportunity. We want,
I think
here
that's why I brought up the blog, because you have to know to go to your website. And if you don't know when activities or when things are going to be updated, the public would have to be checking in daily.
yes.
So I'm thinking the outreach needs to come out to the community, not having the community come to your website, or at least having the outreach direct them to your website.
Great point about notification, Victoria. Thank you.
Victoria, I'll just add that I know that the blog is on our listserv, and so Tracy gets anything we send out with information to the community, she gets as well.
Okay.
So she's following along closely.
Nolani would love to hear your thoughts, and then I'll read some of the comments here in the chat.
I agree with Victoria. I think most people there needs to be another avenue besides having to go to the website. West Seattle blog's great for that. I'm sure Vashon has one, Kitsap, all those things. I do like the idea that you guys put in about having a standing kind of section of the meeting that allows people to comment and things. I think that's always important to just kind of make sure that we keep it an opportunity for others to speak at each meeting.
Yes, thank you. I think that echoes some of the comments here in the chat. Susan offers that she prefers the idea of having feedback provided in advance to be shared with members. There's some comments here. John says, I like anything that encourages casual participants to engage. Michelle offers, I like having a standing part of the agenda to hear community comments and also ask for feedback ahead of the meeting. So both options. Larry put here, I'd love to see some ongoing survey tools as well. Getting feedback in that way, is that the plan? Greg offers that the preference is for advanced feedback ahead of the meeting to facilitate staying on task and respectful of time. So I think just like any other conversation or topic that we'll work through together as a group, there's a multitude of preferences and interests. And I think what I'd like to propose is that we hear the feedback here and offer back to the group a recommendation for how we frame the future agenda based on what we've heard here today. Oh, Frank, I see I missed your hand in the comment section here. Frank, go ahead.
No problem. Thank you. I guess I might have a little bit different opinion on that, in that if we have a task to do, which is to provide our input, I mean, I'd hate to see the meetings get sidetracked by people coming in sporadically that aren't involved and just have a pet peeve that is not on task or on track, and then to have it kind of derail our efforts. I just would caution us that way. And again, I can understand how we could have a whole bunch of things come up that we've already hashed out or already dealt with, unless somebody, again, when you have maybe a set time, you would have somebody qualify these people or qualify the questions, and then hopefully maybe they could just provide their comments in writing and not provide them, not to try and speak them out again, just to stay on task. We have a job to do here, and it's going to be cumbersome already. We only think about it. We've got 24 meetings. It's not a lot of time to do what sounds like, we might be able to do here. My comment.
Thank you, Frank. Other thoughts or feedback after hearing Frank's feedback from other members?
I was just going to say, I agree with what Frank just said. To stay on task, it's a very complex issue, and I think, should consider community feedback, but it should be done in a methodical way so that we're efficient and respectful of everyone's time. And that's why I was saying, I think if we could ask for feedback 48 hours in advance and then have intermittent times for people to join in and hear feedback, but not to rehash everything over and over again. That just wouldn't be productive.
So I'm hearing, Michelle, from you, maybe the recommendation for a bit of a hybrid approach, but mostly focusing on input in advance.
Yes.
Okay, great. And I see some comments here in the chat around the idea of advanced feedback and keeping the group on task. So thank you. Thanks again for engaging in this participation and conversation here today. Either of these or a hybrid of both will certainly provide an opportunity for people to have access to the community advisory group and help influence what you might be considering. But again, in valuing the time and the work we have to do together. So thanks very much. With that, we are at 7:46. And so the last poll around CAG engagement, and again, thanks for bearing with me, is around how we want to be engaging in between meetings. And so I'm going to run, this will be one of our final polls for the night. So this is around what thoughts do you have about CAG engagement in between meetings? Would you prefer to see who's most interested and start a topic specific work group that reports back to the CAG, send a doodle poll to find a time that works for most members, address topics via all CAG member emails as much as possible, or do you have other ideas you want to share with the group?
This is Frank. Can I ask for more clarification on the question? I'm not quite understanding that and looking at the answer options we have available.
Sure, Frank. This is around how the CAG would prefer to be engaged in between these meetings. If there's information to share, more to learn, or a more detailed discussion that might need to be in addition to the scheduled CAG meetings.
So it's
You're freezing on me a bit. So looking here at what folks said, as much as possible, as topics or information requests come up, using email, dialogue, and communication first. There are a handful of folks who also would prefer to schedule additional meetings in between CAG meetings as it makes sense. So it does seem like an interest in having all member communication. Okay. So with that, looking at the time, I think we have about 5 minutes for general questions before we move towards our closing. And I'm going to come back to our PowerPoint here and open up the opportunity for questions about, more specific questions about the project or anything you've heard here tonight before we close. You can use the chat or raise hand function.
Liz, this is Frank again. I'm sorry to be asking so many questions, but one of the things that Hadley said, I thought it was Hadley, she said, as the process evolves and, as our process evolves and we start to gel and kind of come to some decision or provide some input of that's been requested. And yet you've got the executive committee who's doing their thing and you've got the TAG that's doing their thing. And maybe I missed this part and I apologize if I did, is how are we going to know what they're thinking or what we're thinking? Because we could have an idea that would be great to us, but yet the environmental people just say, hey, this is just not going to work. That's just a no, I'll stop. How are we going to get past those things, or how are we going to facilitate that?
Hadley, do you want to start on that one?
Sure. Well, I think a couple things spring to mind, Frank. One, that's where this sort of dialogue, that if you feel like as a group that you want additional information or want to know what others in the community, whether it's the TAG and CAG members or others, are thinking that that's something that, you know, we hope you'll bring to us or bring to Liz as the facilitator, and we can share it. We'll be sharing meeting summaries of those other groups will be posted so you can see what they discuss in their meetings. We talked about the ability to have members of this group come to a EAG meeting and brief them, and maybe they can brief you. So it's somewhat fluid, and I think as we go along, but then just in the big picture, to go back to that graphic I showed earlier of the iterative process, there's never going to be just sort of one bite at the apple where we come to you and say, give us your input, and if you don't say it right now, that's your last chance, you know, and you won't have had the ability to hear what others say about it. So at every step of the way, it sort of gives some input, we'll consider it, we'll share what we're hearing from others, you could give other input, and then it'll sort of proceed in that iterative circular way as we go along, while still making progress as much as we can. But each milestone isn't just a one day in time, it's a period of time. And that's especially important when we think of the public outreach, that we'll have a meeting with you, we'll share what we're planning to take to the general public, we'll have, you know, our public meetings, public virtual open houses, then we'll hear input from them, we'll bring that back to you. This is what we heard from the community, and maybe you'll be hearing from the communities on your own. I mean, that's one of your key roles, I think, that maybe we didn't articulate as clearly, as to hear from your own communities and stakeholder groups that you represent. And then that may change your discussion once you hear what the public said at the public meeting, and may change your opinion and adjust your thinking. So I think it's going to be sort of going in that circular way the whole way.
Alec, do you have something to add before we move on?
Yes, I would just like to add that, you know, this process, the Pell process, as we outlined earlier, it's about a 2-year process. And, you know, there are a series of milestones, and there are going to be a series of key points in time when we're going to need input to make decisions about, okay, you know, for example, the purpose and need statement. You know, that's a very, it's going to be a draft still while we're in the Pell process that doesn't get finalized until the environmental review, but it's a really key document, because it really outlines what this project is, the problems the project is going to solve, and you know what this project is really about, for example. So I think there's you know, going to be some really key milestones like that, and then also the screening criteria that's coming up. That's another really big one, because that screening criteria is what the alternatives are going to be measured against to determine if they move forward or not. And so the way I see it, yeah, this interaction between the groups is important, but it's also important for us to consider that we're going to need your input and feedback as we shape those key deliverables, you know, along the way during this 2-year process.
Alec, thanks for that. We are at 7:55, and I see some questions in the chat about dates and timing for next meeting. We do have 2 final polls to gauge some preference, and I want to make sure we have a chance to do that before we close today. Marty, I know we didn't get to your comment. If you want to put it in the chat, and we can make sure to incorporate it and address it as best we can. But I do want to move and make sure we have a chance to talk about scheduling. So we went through some questions and comments. As we mentioned earlier, we will share a summary as well as the recording from tonight with all members. We'll share much of this content tonight in the slides is combined in the charter for the group. And thanks for your feedback. There's some things we'll want to adjust and change based on the discussion. We'll be sharing that charter as well as the community engagement plan for your input ahead of our next meeting. Right now, we are proposing the next meeting of the Community Advisory Group to take place on Wednesday, July 28th from 6 to 7:30. Given summer schedules and the updates that are happening, we know this might not work for everyone. And we do want to take a minute now to run some polls on preferred times and days of the week for future meetings after we get through this summer period. So I'm going to launch 2 polls. One will be around day of the week and one will be specific to preferred times. You don't have to write this down, you can, and you can be checking your calendar. We'll be following up with a meeting invite as well as a link to register for Zoom as we did for this meeting. And here we go with the polls for the future meetings. Okay, well, good news for the case of July, but it looks like most folks are able to make Wednesdays work, with a few people preferring Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're going to go now and seek your feedback about time. Just a reminder, as you fill out this last poll, we haven't heard from everyone about how they'd like their name and affiliation to be listed in the roster. So if you could take just a minute and make sure and fill that in either directly to myself or to the group in the chat, we greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so looking at feedback, some notes here from 13 people that this time generally works okay, with a few folks preferring late afternoon and early evening. So certainly gives us a good window to work with. And it's helpful to hear that there isn't a strong preference for daytime. That's what we heard during the application process, but wanted to give a chance to check and make sure that that's still rung true for people. And stop sharing those results. Great. So looking at the chat here, there are just a couple outstanding comments I wanted to address. One is, will the milestones be shared? And Frank, I know Alec covered some of those in his response, but yes, we'll be spending more time at the next meeting talking around the specific milestones for community engagement. And they'll also, that detail is also included in the community engagement plan. I'm doing a quick scroll here, and there's a note here from Susan around a preference to have the CAG listserv for email versus sharing individual emails. I think it would help us all keep on the same page. And I also have an issue with emails. So I think wanting to make sure that there's a listserv that we're able to use versus sharing individual emails. And I think with that, again, I apologize if I missed anything in the chat here, but we'll be doing a review when we do our follow-up and synopsis. But with that, we're a minute away from time. We're going to close for tonight. Again, if you have questions or comments in the interim, you see our email address, our website, and I've connected with many of you via email and phone. And so please do be in touch if you have feedback about tonight's meeting or other questions or comments that you have. Again, thanks for hanging out with us on a summery Wednesday evening, and we appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you in July. We hope you all stay well. Thank you. Take care.